Well, thank you very much. There are so many luminaries in this room that I'm sure we can't greet all of you. So one last diplomatic phrase I've heard, all protocol observed. And with that, let me invite Professor Serageldin. People are laughing. I didn't mean it. Professor Serageldin, the chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, to the podium. Thank you.
Mrs. Michelle, fellow trustees, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is once more my privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Nelson Mandela Foundation and its sister organizations, the Mandela Rhodes Foundation and the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, to this, the 9th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture. I am sure that we all join in wishing Madiba a belated happy birthday, and I'm equally sure that on the actual day of his birthday, Monday the 18th of July, all of us were engaged in one way or the other celebrating International Mandela Day, giving 67 minutes of our time towards a better life for all. And as we say, happy birthday, Madiba, let us commit to making every day a Mandela Day. Madiba is watching live from home, and can also say, welcome, Madiba, and as you know, we love you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to brief you very briefly about developments at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. This year marks the 5th and the final year of its transformation into the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory. At the heart of the center is the concept of memory for justice. Essentially, the center is an archive that captures the life and times of Nelson Mandela in all its complexity, promise and hope, and that promotes dialogue around critical social issues that Nelson Mandela and his comrades have always held dear. But let us pause for a few minutes and hear Madiba himself speak about this.
We have traveled a long journey. We have fought for peace and reconciliation, for social justice, for all men, women, and children to live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. These are ideals I still believe in, ideals that I still live for. But the time has come to fully hand over my work. Memory is a vital force in the life of people and nations and can help unite divided society. In our view, the work of archives in the South Africa of today is potentially one of the most critical contributions to restoration and reconciliation. All of us have a powerful moral obligation to the many voices and stories either marginalized or suppressed during the apartheid era. Today, we are launching the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory project. It will be run by the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We want it to be part of what we have called the processes of restoration and reconciliation. It is our hope that from these small beginnings, it will grow into a vibrant public resource offering a range of services to South Africans and visitors from all parts of the world. We wanted to work closely with the many other institutions that make up the South African archival system. And most importantly, We want it to dedicate itself to the recovery of memories and stories suppressed by power. That is the call of justice, the call that must be the project's most important shaping influence. The history of our country is characterized by too much forgetting, a forgetting which served the powerful and dispossessed the weak. One of our challenges as we build and extend democracy is the need to ensure that our youth know where we come from, what we have done to break the shackles of oppression, and how we have pursued the journey to freedom and dignity for all. For those of us who are older and have lived through the transition from apartheid to democracy, the processes of remembering offer us healing and a means of respecting the many comrades who made it possible. This is what archives are about. This is what we want the Center of Memory Project to be about. We will be grateful for any assistance in helping us to achieve this objective. I thank you.
Thank you, Madiba, and ladies and gentlemen, there, simply put, is the task ahead for the foundation or the center. The Nelson Mandela Foundation, the Center of Memory, will continue to promote the legacy of its founder, work as hard as ever to make the record of his life and times available to the world, and endeavor to bring people together in conversation and dialogue, and again in Madiba's words, especially those who disagree. And the annual lecture is an integral part of that task. And again, thanks very much for joining us at this, the 9th annual lecture. We've had some very distinguished speakers at the previous lecture, and we continue that tradition. And it is my great privilege to introduce you to our speaker for today, Professor Ismail Serageldin, who is director of the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. He also chairs the boards for each of the library's affiliated research institutes and museums. He is professor of the International Chair, Knowledge Against Poverty at Collège de France in Paris. He serves as chair and member of a number of advisory committees to academic, research, scientific and international institutions and civil society efforts, which include the Egyptian Academy of Science, the Academy of Sciences for the Developing World, the Indian National Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and the European Academy of Sciences and Arts. He is very active in the struggle for sustainable development and against poverty in the world. He has published over 60 books and monographs and over 200 papers on a variety of topics, including biotechnology, rural development, sustainability, and the value of science to society. He holds a bachelor's degree in science in engineering from Cairo University, and master's degree and a PhD from Harvard University, and has received 29 honorary doctorates. So indeed, a distinguished scholar and activist who will address us this afternoon on pluralism, cohesion, and social participation for social justice. Dr. Serageldin.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a rare privilege to be invited to South Africa to celebrate the birthday of Nelson Mandela, the man who inspired the world, who liberated his people, and perhaps did more than any other human being to destroy the venom of racism in the world. Madiba, along with your countless admirers and disciples, I wish you many happy returns. It is a great honor to be invited to deliver the 9th Mandela Lecture, to follow in the footsteps of the illustrious people who have preceded me, many of whom I am privileged to call my friends. Today, I would like to address 5 points. Social justice as the foundation of the state. Reflection on the meaning of justice. And an understanding of freedom, rights, and equity. And then the problem of cohesion in the age of pluralism, and to end with the centrality of participation. It is most appropriate to start with the notion of social justice, since that is the foundation of the modern Republic of South Africa. If modern democratic states are based on a social contract that unites the human family within its borders in a framework of citizenship, then the felt presence of a modicum of social justice is the necessary glue that will hold that society together. Apartheid was the epitome of social injustice, and its overthrow was a great moral victory for freedom, equality, and justice. The light shining from South Africa has finally reached the northern part of the continent where I live. And as you all know, this has been the Arab Spring. Ordinary citizens have toppled autocrats and still battle dictators armed with little more than their convictions. Ultimately, they cannot be denied. For as Victor Hugo has said, no army can defeat an idea whose time has come. And freedom, human rights, and democracy are ideas whose time has come for even the most remote corners of the globe. And sparked by the successes of Tunisia and Egypt, the people speak. From the Syrian demonstrators of Damascus and Daraa, to the fighting Libyan defenders of Benghazi and Misrata, to the chanting Yemeni crowds in Sana'a, they are the embodiment of the unconquerable spirit described by Henley's Invictus, who says, "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." Now, this surge for freedom will face setbacks, to be sure, but ultimately it must triumph. And it is more than a demand for freedom of expression. It is also a demand for the making of social justice. For our youth are revolting against a society where there is or was corruption in high places, aimlessness among youth, anxiety among the elderly, and a profound sense of loss among those who look beyond material success for the inner meaning of their lives. A new society has to be built on the basis of social justice. But what is justice? If we try to answer in the shorthand of the philosopher John Rawls, justice is fairness, we will find that its deceptive simplicity hides profound issues. Surely, we all desire to be fair. Who wants to be considered unfair? Yet we shall find that justice has multiple components, including freedom, equality, inclusion, and social interaction. Now, this last requires some clarification. Social interaction? Yes, for if humans need their freedom as much as they need air, they also need to interact with other humans, for we are fundamentally social animals. The worst punishment we can think of is solitary confinement. And in some communities, a fundamental tool of social coercion is the threat of shunning, cutting off all social interaction with the offending person by the entire community. Now, the stigma attached to some diseases, leprosy in the past, HIV/AIDS in the more recent past, results in the exclusion of these members from social interaction. Likewise, such purposeful stigmatization by race, by gender, or religion is equally damaging to society and clearly undermines our sense of justice. And that makes it particularly important to reflect on the pluralistic societies of today, where many groups coexist. And marginalization and social exclusion of members of society make for an unjust society, whatever the reason used to justify that exclusion. Now back to fairness. Let us stop for a parable. This is a story I owe to my good friend Amartya Sen. You meet 3 children with a flute, and they ask you to help them decide who should get the flute. The first child is poor and has no toys, while the other 2 are rich and have many toys. The facts are not contested by any of the children. Thus, it is fair to let the poor child have the flute. Now consider the same 3 children, but the middle child says that she is a talented musician. She enjoys playing the flute. She plays it well. The other 2 have absolutely no musical abilities. They enjoy listening to her play. And again, the facts are not contested. She should get the flute. Now let's consider a third scenario. And again, the facts are not contested. The third child contends that even if the first is poor and the second is talented, he is the one who made the flute. He took a reed, he made the holes in it, and he turned it into a flute. Surely it is only fair that he should get the result of his own work. Now what we have here is some, and only some, of the criteria of social choice. Equity in the first case, utility in the second, entitlement in the third. Now the fact is that all social problems and policies involve a mix of these and other dimensions. And choosing in a fair way has a lot to do with how society values these different dimensions and the weights that we put on each of them at a particular moment in the history of that society. To redress past injustices, it may well be very necessary to put the emphasis on one or another dimension. That is frequently the case when allocating quotas or according compensatory preferential treatment to some underprivileged group in a society. But clarity in the political debate, lucidity in our social intercourse can ensure that social cohesion is enhanced and not undermined by the choices that we make when we use such criteria. So if social justice has many dimensions, how do we get there? Well, the 2 pillars for achieving social justice would be freedom and equality. Again, every one of those words has multiple meanings. Freedom entails the exercise of rights, and equality may need to take into account the innate inequalities between individual capabilities. Each points to some discussion. Madiba told us to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. That is why we have to learn to go forth and fashion the wise constraints that make people free. But the meaning of freedom is ingrained in the soul of all humans. I think the people of South Africa have given the most striking example of the sacrifice and tenacity of a people yearning to be free. And Nelson Mandela has given the supreme example of a leader's devotion to the cause of his people and his own. He has become the embodiment of wise leadership and of the unstoppable urge to be free. While it is an inspiring lesson for all of Africa and all of humanity, it is also an invitation to reflect on the meaning of that most fundamental of human rights. Freedom is about the ability to decide, the ability to choose. But we very quickly notice that many in society are not able to choose, even if the law guarantees them that right. Thus, extreme poverty severely limits the choices open to an individual. Lack of education or illness can also be important constraints in an individual's ability to fulfill his or her potential, not to mention social attitudes towards gender or ethnicity. Therefore, the exercise of rights needs the empowerment of individuals with certain capabilities that allow them to effectively practice such rights. To many, society's assistance to each individual to ensure that they acquire such capabilities becomes itself a human right, since it is necessary to exercise the other rights. Without that, there can be no social justice. Now, Amartya Sen has also cogently argued about the importance of balancing rights and capabilities to ensure that the exercise of freedoms, and he recast even the issues of development as the process of broadening the space of freedom in which people can thrive. Now, other specialists like to refer to positive and negative rights. They categorize human rights into positive rights, which require active provision of entitlements by the state, and negative rights, which they say that the state can protect simply by taking no action. They are further categorized as political and civil rights on the one hand, and economic, social, and cultural rights on the other. The former are often considered to be cost-free, precise, and enforceable in a court of law. The latter are viewed as costly to provide, vague, and cannot be properly judged in a court of law. But such categorizations are confounded by reality. Thus, building up and maintaining an effective judicial system, which is essential for the civil rights to due process before the law and for other rights relating to judicial process, is positive, resource-intensive, and vague, while the social right to housing is precise and easily enforceable in a court of law. Now, for me, I believe that all these categorizations are minor, that we need a broad definition of rights with adequate boundaries of how far to exercise each to ensure social justice and social cohesion. But if freedom is ultimately to allow each person to live as fully as they can, then the inherent differences between people challenge us in terms of the inequalities that they will generate. People are multidimensional, and we are unequal in our endowments in various dimensions: musical talent, ability in sports, physical strength, educational attainment, entrepreneurial drive, and so on. To measure equality before the law is but a start. Now, some people would see fairness, to come back to that point about fairness, as the provision of equal opportunities only. And if the result is to have some people who are as rich as Bill Gates and some who are extremely poor, so be it. Others, most of us, in fact, would see that a society where some people are lighting cigars with $1,000 bills, while others are starving, is inherently unjust, whatever the starting position was and whatever the procedural guarantees have been. Extreme inequality is corrosive. It hardens the attitudes of the rich and powerful towards the poor and lowly. It builds acceptance of the incongruity of wealth amidst misery and exclusion. And it undermines the very notions of social justice and social cohesion. It makes a mockery of fairness and leads to the slippery path of class warfare as the only means of redress. and men have said that for a long time. Quoting Oliver Goldsmith from 1770, he says, "Ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay." Indeed, recent studies have confirmed our suspicions that far from being a necessary corollary to compensate the talented and the inventive, who everybody agrees are the forces in society that propel society forward, excessive inequality is inefficient and is associated with a variety of social ills. But all efforts to provide equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity have run afoul of the inherent differences between people, the inherent endowments between people, as witnessed in the failure of communist societies who ideologically pursued such notions. Thus, I think most of us would demand a minimum of decent standards of living in the outcome, in addition to the equality of opportunity in the start process. So perhaps it is better to talk of equity rather than equality. The former is more relational, the latter more absolute. Equity is defined as something that is impartial, just, and fair. It leads to a view of justice applied in circumstances by law, yet influenced by principles of ethics and a general innate sense of fairness. How these latter must be exercised can and will change over time as social circumstances change as well. Hence, the relevance of the story of the 3 children and the flute. So justice in the sense of equity brings to mind that many things can be legal and correct, but the outcomes of their rigorous application can remain unjust. After a natural disaster or a prolonged drought, losing land or home because of the inability of the person to meet their payments to their creditors is an example of a legal but unjust outcome. And it calls to mind that old phrase that justice must be tempered by mercy, a call most eloquently put forth by Shakespeare's Portia, for those of you who remember The Merchant of Venice. She says, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. It is mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show us like gods when mercy seasons justice." But beyond justice and equity lie the qualities needed for social cohesion to bring the disparate elements of society together. All nations are today becoming rainbow nations. We are entering the age of pluralism. The ideas of racially pure, ethnically unique, or homogeneous religious societies are now things that have been rejected by the overwhelming majority of humanity. Those who promoted that by genocide and by ethnic cleansing have been defeated. But the corollary, the acceptance of pluralism, is not easy to implement. Diverse communities may indeed be enriching the mosaic of a multicultural society, but it also generates a sense of unease among the population. We have witnessed disasters in the Balkans and Rwanda, the dissolution of the state in Yugoslavia and Sudan. All remind us that pluralism is difficult to implement, even in the democratic societies of Europe, without verging towards separation. Belgium is at a crossroads today, while Czechoslovakia underwent a peaceful separation between the Czechs and the Slovaks. For many, the melting pot approach of the United States remains attractive. But it involves a negation of cultural pluralism, even as it exalts the uniformity of national values and the diversity of ethnic and religious mix of the citizens. It is American values that holds people together. What used to be called cosmopolitanism has almost disappeared. The cosmopolitanism in great cities such as Istanbul and Alexandria has been lost. Recapturing the spirit is proving elusive. For cosmopolitanism involved diverse communities with very distinct identities, rubbing shoulders and interacting every day. So in Alexandria, throughout the 19th and early 20th century, communities of Greeks, Syrians, Italians, French, British, Armenians, Turks, and Arabs coexisted and intermingled. They were considered Egyptians. Christians, Muslims, and Jews interacted. We would lunch together at the Syrian club, dine together at the Greek club, and they had a multiplicity of newspapers and produced novels and plays and films in multiple languages. The mosaic of diverse cultures was overlain by other social networks that crisscrossed many political movements and political parties that drew from all these diverse communities. Today, coexisting pluralistic communities find recapturing that spirit elusive without slipping into exclusion and hostility. But youth and technology are coming to our rescue. Let's hear it for youth. The internet culture created by youth and predominantly pioneered by youth has been able to dissolve boundaries of politics and geography to help create networks of like-minded people who can communicate, share experiences, reinforce each other on common causes in ways that were unthinkable a generation ago. Youth have also led the way in the formation of social networks such as Facebook and Twitter. They bear witness to events through YouTube and Flickr, and in so doing, they have not only created their own special means of communication, they have also revolutionized the notion of how societies interact. Thus, cohesion and social interaction in the virtual world are becoming as important as that practiced in the physical world of daily contacts, and many young people spend hours every day in such virtual connections. Yet the presence of these additional multiple overlays, as one is part of many, many networks, may enrich life, but it leads to two other problems. Where friendships based on physical contacts are few and deep, those nurtured by the web are broad but shallower. But they may constitute a complement and even a support for the traditional friendships that have existed from time immemorial, but will not replace them. And that's not necessarily a problem, but it becomes so if it takes too many hours away from the activities in the real world and the real society. And it could even be a real positive force for strengthening social cohesion if it is used wisely. But the second problem is more difficult. Where the old media usually tried to expose people to a variety of opinions, the enormous explosion of outlets that the new media has created allows people to gravitate towards the specific outlets that support their point of view. They get reinforced in their prejudices, and that in turn leads to more polarization in debate, even as it caters to a wider variety of opinions and removes the barriers to expressing such opinions. On balance, however, I have unlimited confidence in youth. They will craft the world in their own image, idealistic, dynamic, and imaginative. And it will be a different world than that which we have known, for we are on the cusp of a major global revolution. That global revolution is often referred to as the coming of the information age or the knowledge-based society. Yet, to address the issues of social justice, pluralism, freedom, equality, or participation, we need much more than information or even knowledge. We need wisdom. Data, when organized, becomes information. Information, when explained, becomes knowledge. But wisdom is something else. For example, the people who invaded Iraq had a lot of knowledge, but I'm not so sure about the amount of wisdom. Wisdom is something else. It requires combining knowledge with prescience, judgment, and the patina of experience. And we must hope that what we are living through right now will turn out to be not just a knowledge revolution, as it's called, but the start of wisdom. But humility would have us ask, as T.S. Eliot did a century ago, where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge we have lost in information? And he didn't even have the internet. But I'm not pessimistic. Indeed, I'm excited, and I invite others to share my wonder and admiration, my concerns and my misgivings, and above all, to be infected by the excitement of the times and the fantastic explorations that lie ahead that will transform forever our views of ourselves and of our societies as we move to realize our aspirations for social justice. So how does a society promote that social capital, that glue that holds society together, promotes trust and makes transactions between people possible? Actually, the evidence is overwhelming that participation is absolutely central to the properly functioning society. Participation promotes transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. It fights corruption and promotes efficiency in government. In a landmark study published in 1993, Robert Putnam of Harvard showed that much of the variation between the performance of the northern and southern parts of Italy, where the north is rich, dynamic, and growing rapidly, while the south is poor, stagnant, and corrupt, could be traced to the much greater level of citizen participation in the north. It did not matter what form that participation took, from soccer clubs to choral societies, from school boards to art clubs. It was the intensity of social interaction in voluntary-based, horizontally structured organizations, as opposed to being part of coercive, hierarchical organizations that made all the difference. And that, after all, is perhaps a definition of social cohesion and social interaction. It is essential in this time of pluralism and diversity, and it is a manifestation of that dynamic rainbow nation that Nelson Mandela helped to nurture on the rubble of racism and injustice. But the task ahead is difficult. And again, Madiba teaches us the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. We who believe in democracy and in liberty are going to win. No one can stop the tides of change and progress. And the last 400 years have been a global march towards liberating the human mind from the shackles of dogma and liberating the human condition from oppression and despotism, to where democratic government is not an exception but the norm. Setbacks are momentary, mere blips in the sweeping march of history. Now, these powerful societal forces of democracy and human rights are like the deep, unseen ocean currents that govern the climate and shape our destiny. Many people focus on events that grab the headlines and generate intense debate, but these are like surface storms that can sink ships and drown people, but they do not have the profound effect of the deep currents. Unlike the deep currents, they lack the staying power, the lasting effect that real societal change is based on. Now, these enlightened values of human rights, the rule of law, democratic participation, social cohesion to promote social justice are the values that can provide youth with a sense of higher purpose than mere material gain. They undergird the dignity of the individual and the mutual respect that is so necessary for civilized discourse. They allow our children to grow in the belief that the ideals of truth, goodness, liberty, equality, and justice are not just empty words. It is these values that promote a culture of humanism and the culture of peace. Now, the opportunity to be with you today to deliver this 9th Mandela Lecture is not just a great honor, it is an inspiration for me and for others to redouble our efforts and to spread these humane values that Nelson Mandela has so ably defended and so completely personified. Especially for our youth, who sparked our revolution, just as other young people transformed societies, reinvented business enterprise, and redefined our scientific understanding of the world we live in. We have to strive to build social justice. And so, to our youth, to all youth, from the Cape to Cairo and beyond, I say, you have been called the children of the internet or the Facebook generation, but you are more. You are the vanguard of the great global revolution of the 21st century. So go forth into the journey of your lives to create a better world for yourselves and for others. Think of the unborn, remember the forgotten, give hope to the forlorn, include the excluded, reach out to the unreached, and by your actions from this day onwards, lay the foundations for better tomorrows. So get on with the task of creating social justice based on pluralism, cohesion, and social participation. And in so doing, take us to a new country, a country where, in the words of Tagore, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led by thee into ever-widening thought of action, into that heaven of freedom. My Father, let my country awake. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Serageldin. I'm sure that we will all look at our iPads with new respect. Mr. Sekhwali, I no longer will think you strange when I visit your office and you look at your notes on your iPad. I will look at you with new respect.